It's a painting of a woman wearing a golden Grecian robe. She looks strong, determined, beautiful. She's holding a mirror above her head, revealing reflections of her turned the other way. The artist who created the piece is Angela Hardy, and so is the woman in the painting. She painted herself as Venus, the first in a series of portraits depicting women as goddesses. Last month, her artwork was featured in the Salle du Carrousel in Paris, an underground annex of the Louvre. Angela is now back home in St. Thomas, and this morning she joins me in studio. Welcome, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Julianne. Pleasure to be here.
So walking into the Louvre and seeing Venus within, you're painting as you as Venus, what did that feel like?
It was overwhelming. There's part of you that after you get the news, you kind of shut down a little bit because there's work that needs to be done. And it's a smack in the face. The reality of it is I was there a number of years before with my mother. She's also an artist. She's from Labrador West. That's where I grew up. And we were walking through, and of course the joke is, what if your work ever hung here one day? But you're looking at the actual main part of the Louvre, and, well, you kind of have to be dead to be in the Louvre. So to have the opportunity to be able to show what the Salon, which is about 161, 62 years running now, and it was established by a mass of French artists at the time to kind of, we'll say, get away from the main salons where everything was being dictated by politics and the bourgeoisie and all this stuff. So to be able to have their own group that people like Delacroix and Millet and Courbet and all these people were part of this new, segregation to kind of move into more freeing art. And that's what the Salon represents. They represent the new vision every year of what the artists of the world are creating.
And how did your work end up there?
It was an interesting story. There's another artist, he's a photographer actually, and he lives in Selkirk. His name is Robert Irvine. And he had gotten his work in last year. And we had finally met. He had seen my work hanging somewhere, and we had this discussion. And he said, I can't understand why you're not there. He said, when I get back, we have to make this happen. But while he was there, he actually took the time to stand in front of the pyramids in front of the Louvre and Photoshop my painting, one of my paintings, into his hands to help me visualize it. And when he came back, we made sure that my portfolio was put together and it got presented to the delegate, or the head of the delegation, Benedict Lecat in France. And then it got put in front of the SNBA jurors to be it got accepted. So
I imagine a really big deal for an artist. How significant is an exhibit like this for you?
It's very significant. The reality is it wasn't something that was even on my radar. Artists have these paths, these goals that we try, because every artist, we have a slightly different genre, medium, whatever it is, and our pathways might be completely different. And in this case, I just thought I was going to be continuing to do the gallery and show scene within North America, because I do work with Canada and the United States. And to be on an international level, it just wasn't comprehensible to me until somebody presented the opportunity. It's one of those things where I say to other artists, to students, that always keep, don't put your blinders up so tight on your path that you think you're supposed to be on, or you're going to miss probably some of the greatest opportunities. And they're there. They're often there for many people. We just have this narrow vision of what we think things are supposed to go.
Wise advice. The painting is part of your series, Indestructible Women.
Yes.
Why did you decide to paint yourself first?
I teach a lot of women often, surprisingly, even though the art world is more dominated by men. But when I teach, it's often women. And because you're dealing with something that makes people feel very insecure. Creativity makes people feel very insecure. When the reality is, when you embrace creativity, it actually raises your level of confidence once you finally embrace it. But these women would tell me their stories about their life, and some of them are desperately heartbreaking, and they don't share them with other people, but there's a connection when you put them in that position. And I always felt that part of my career was lacking. I always believe everything you should do should be in service. And I felt that my background with art is very classical. I love the classics. And I felt that if I could paint myself as a goddess with certain archetypes that I felt upheld what all of us as women should be upholding, and that is our beauty, our sensuality, our power to hold that. And in particular, if you think about history of goddesses, they would be revered for all these beautiful attributes. But when you think about the history of women, women as a real person were never allowed to actually really own it. Until now. We have that opportunity now. And it's even more prevalent with things like the Me Too movement and stuff. So I would get there, and with students, I would tell them a bit about my story. And it's personal, so I won't go into it. But I can allow women now a platform in which I can at least give the symbology of their story a place to be told. And by doing my own first, I felt, I guess the line would be basically that I didn't have the right to tell their story unless I was willing to tell mine first.
What did it feel like to paint yourself as Venus, to paint yourself in that way?
It was terrifying. It was very terrifying. And there is nudity in it. And I've spent quite a bit of time living and visiting Europe, so the mentality of nudity is very different over there. It's very much embraced. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And North American society has this thing where we actually downplay it and kind of turn it into, sadly, a bit of a dirty thing. And that really lowers our self-esteem and our capacity to outwardly own anything that we do in life. And by me embracing that, it gave me a little bit more liberty to be able to look at other women and say, what part of your story do you want to tell? I'm willing to put this out there. You don't have to put that much out there, but what do you want to put out there?
And you've been painting other women who you know, who you come into contact with, who are making a difference in their communities. Yes. Tell me, just before we wrap up here, about some of the other women in your series.
I have Lisa Nye, who's from Jarvis. She is a Canadian heavy lift champion. She's going to be Nike. Carolina Miranda is Lichelle, which is a Mayan goddess. And then we have Sarah Smith, one of your very own London musicians, and she's going to be Euterpe, which is the musician of Poetical Muse. And every single one of these women, they're chosen specifically because they're using these platforms to help liberate other women and share their stories to other women within their communities. And by that, it gives us that 6 degrees of separation where we can get more tightly knitted and not doing it on this big platform, but by making it go viral through smaller communities and outlets that way.
And you actually photograph them, you create the props, you set it up, and then you paint from that photograph. When will you be sharing the full series? And what do you hope it will happen with the images?
It'll take about 1 year to complete all 20 to 25. But the goal is now to have certain community accessible groups to present as the paintings come out so that women within those communities can use these as a backdrop to tell their stories then too.
Angela, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Pleasure to speak with you too.
That's Angela Hardy, an artist who lives in St. Thomas, and she just had a piece exhibited in the Salle du Carrousel in Paris, which is part of the Louvre. It's the first in a series called Indestructible Women. Do you know an indestructible woman in your life, a friend, peer, family member who inspires you? Let me know. Extra points for which goddess they would be. London Morning at cbc.ca, and our handle on Twitter is @LondonMorning.